Hi everybody, thanks for tuning in. My name's Sumitra Upham. I'm a curator based in London. I'm currently Senior Curator of Public Programmes at the Design Museum and one of the curators for the 5th Istanbul Design Biennial Empathy Revisited Designs for More Than One, which was led by Mariana Pestana. I'm here today with the artist and designer Enni-Kukka Tuomala inside her new installation at Somerset's House, commissioned for the London Design Biennale by the Finnish Institute as Finland's contribution to the Biennale this year. Enni and I have had the pleasure of working together over the last year, we worked out today, on a new body of work that Enni was commissioned by the Design Museum to undertake. And really she spent the last year building on her extensive research around interpersonal empathy between humans, really to explore broader empathic encounters between humans and the natural world through looking more specifically at trees. And so, Enni, we're going to talk about both those projects today in a bit more detail, and of course your thinking around empathy more broadly. But to begin with, it's probably important to talk about why is empathy such a vital, urgent subject for us to be addressing and thinking about today.
Thank you so much, Sumitra. Welcome to the Empathy Echo Chamber. It's such a pleasure and a joy to have you here and have this conversation. I feel like we're extending so many chances you said we've had throughout the year, talking about the importance of empathy more broadly in our society and culture, but also specifically in design. I fundamentally believe that empathy is the most radical of all human emotions. It's something Gloria Steinem actually said first and foremost, so I can't take credit for that brilliant quote. But arguably, we live in a time where we need it more than ever. We talk a lot about the global empathy deficit that is growing all over the world. It's something that's very well documented in research, but also has been spoken about by everyone from Barack Obama to Pope Francis, who quite recently called it the globalization of indifference, which I thought was very poignant. So we're seeing this decline in our abilities to understand other people's experiences and perspectives, which is very worrisome to say the least. And I really believe that is one of the root causes behind so many of these symptoms that we're seeing spread across our headlines on a daily basis, whether that is looking at our disconnection with ourselves, our disconnection with each other, whether that's looking at polarization across political ideologies and values, or more broadly some of the conflicts and divisions that we're seeing in our communities at large, or then looking at our disconnection with our natural world, as you already mentioned, the climate emergency, which is such a pressing issue. I really believe that empathy both sits behind some of these challenges of us losing touch with our environment and our role within it, but also is the opportunity, it's the solution or part of the solution in laying a foundation for us to better understand each other, better understand ourselves, better understand our environment, but also be able to relate to each other, communicate with each other, have these important vital conversations in order for us to eventually start solving some of these issues. So I'm not saying empathy is not the only answer, but I really believe it lays the groundwork, the starting point for any more connected, more sustainable and more equitable interactions and relationships.
I think you very clearly have and eloquently have articulated the value of empathy politically, socially, ecologically, but as you mentioned at the beginning, I think our shared interest in empathy is its intersectional relationship with design. You are a designer.
Yes.
You've designed this wonderful structure, and so let's shift gear a little bit to thinking about what I'd love to hear from you. Why is empathy an important subject for designers and for the design industry at large to be engaging with right now?
Oh, I love that you brought that up, and it's been such a pleasure to do this work with you at the Design Museum as well, and really at the core of these conversations. I think we're used to, in a more traditional sense, seeing empathy as, yes, an important tool for designers, but a key part of the design process. So we know that at various stages it's important for us to develop empathy to understand our audiences or our users or whoever we may be working with. And that's a really good starting point. It's certainly vital for us to do the work that we do. But I also think it's just no longer enough. I think the day and age that we live in this time, it's not enough just for the designer to have empathy. And what I'm really interested in and what my whole Design for Empathy methodology focuses on is taking empathy from this ingredient in the design process to actually making it the outcome of design. So I'm really interested in how we as designers and creators can foster not just empathy in ourselves, in our process, but actually foster empathy in others through our designs, through the work that we make. And fundamentally, I guess my challenge to all of us is how could we be more than empathizers and actually become catalysts for empathy in others. I feel like that's a huge opportunity for us as design leaders to show the way in this, but also I think it is a part of our core responsibility as well, considering the opportunity for positive impact that we may have through that.
Yeah, and I think design as a discipline or as a medium is often concerned with or preoccupied with problem solving, right?
Yes.
And empathy as a tool is kind of not traditionally seen as a vehicle for addressing some of the most kind of urgent systemic issues facing society today. And so I think your work is a unique and welcomed proposition in proposing a new tool, a new design tool, really for tackling some of these issues, whether they be ecological, whether they be social or political.
Thank you. And how would you say in your work as curator, both at the Design Museum but also recently in Istanbul, you've obviously been working with empathy both as a theme but also in your process of work, having worked with you, I know it's such a core part of how you work with people as well. Like, what's the role it plays in your process?
I mean, empathy, as you know, is something that I've thought a lot about recently, given the theme of the Istanbul Design Biennial. And I guess building on what you say, we're living in this moment. Well, we're living in a climate crisis, but also a social, an economic and political one. And I think this kind of uncertainty that has pervaded all aspects of life has created growing levels of hostility and, of course, isolation, as you articulated, between people, of course, but between other species and between territories and between cultures. And so I think our interest as curators for the Istanbul Design Biennial was really about looking at empathy as a tool to create meaningful social change and really to build a biennial that was a framework for helping, or at least trying to help, people and other species to reconnect, but also a framework for decentering in order to kind of give voice or give rise to other perspectives and other voices. I think we became fascinated with empathy as this unique emotional state of feeling that doesn't reside within the individual body, but it's much more about the interstices between bodies and objects and things, or between selves and others. And lots of that thinking really was derived from a book that I know has meant a lot to you, and this is Susan Lansoni's book on empathy. And that really became a kind of thesis for the biennial and for us as curators. And she talks a lot about, as you know, the kind of shifting definition of empathy throughout history. And very early on in the book, she talks about an early definition of empathy in the early 1900s, which is less about personal empathy or relationships between humans, and more about the transference of feelings from humans into objects and into the natural world. And I think when we read that, we were like, it was a light bulb moment when we thought, my God, like how can we use the biennial to build on that thinking, to take empathy back to its roots, to feel into territories and to feel into other species. And that thinking really became the framework for the biennial in many ways.
Which you've done so beautifully, and I think all the work that you've exhibited as a part of the show has really brought that to life from so many different perspectives. I think that's the real value in empathy, is, and something I feel very strongly about in my own practice, is that even though I'm often the instigator of these projects or these relationships or these interactions, yet it's so important for me that what empathy stands for, what it means, doesn't just come from me. Actually, it is something that is constantly redefined based on the context, based on the people involved, and it's actually something, the definition is something we get to together. And really, in order to work with empathy as a tool, as a process, but also sometimes even almost as a material, it has to be something that, as you said, doesn't exist solely in any of us, but actually exists in this space between us, which is such a key theme in a lot of my work, and really kind of manifests in this empathy echo chamber piece as well. Well before the pandemic, which is interesting now, I feel like we're so aware of this distance, physical distance between us now, but I've been exploring these interpersonal distances and building on what you said already as well, not just the spaces between people, but us and other objects, other beings, our natural world, and in some cases as well, the larger systems that we exist within. What are some of the spaces and distances within those? Because the distances between us, it's not just a physical distance, it can be an emotional, mental, social, cultural distance, and an ideological distance, or an economic distance. So I'm really fascinated by how both empathy can exist in this invisible space between, but that's also all the other good stuff can exist. Emotions, connections, whatever we bring into the space that we can't see or touch is so important. So a lot of my work is really focused on bringing that to life, making it something that's tangible, visible, something that you can actually inhabit, something that's molded by all of us in this space. And I would say, going back to this piece that we're inhabiting today, this whole space is really all about what people bring into it. So it's intentionally a very light, open space. It's both a space because it has walls and a ceiling and a floor, but it's also a non-space because it's literally made of air. And it only really exists when people inhabit it and comes to life through whatever they bring into the space. So every time people enter it, the experience is different and unique because of that.
So let's backtrack slightly, and I feel like this is, you started talking about this, the elephant in the room is the fact that we're sitting in your new installation, the Empathy Echo Chamber. What is an Empathy Echo Chamber? Please tell us.
Yes, absolutely. So the Empathy Echo Chamber is, as you said, my installation and contribution to the London Design Biennale, where I have the honour of representing Finland. And it's an experience that it's created for two people. So we're inviting two strangers to step inside together for a short 15-minute long guided empathy experience. And the piece really started from actually well before the pandemic, back in 2019, where for quite a while already I'd been very concerned and alarmed by these personal individual echo chambers that we increasingly live within. And I would say now, during the pandemic more than ever before, where almost all unexpected and surprising encounters with people, that those encounters that really challenge how we think and how we see the world, have all but been eliminated in the last year and a half. We live in a time, for the first time ever, where we can live in a world that we've curated ourselves. We live in these bubbles where everything we already know and think and feel and like is constantly reinforced and reflected back to us. So this piece really started from this notion of challenging that, and how could that be reframed. So as a first step, I wanted to make this echo chamber, which really currently lives in our minds and online, into an actual physical space, something you could step inside, inhabit, and through that question whether that in itself would change our relationship with it, and whether it would change the way we understand it. And then obviously, because it's the empathy echo chamber, you don't step inside alone, but you step inside with another person. So the aim really is that two individuals step inside. So we have two entrances at either end, and people will step inside as themselves, as individuals, reflecting themselves, but we hope that by the end of the experience they may actually start reflecting each other.
And you've had some really interesting, quite amazing case studies or examples of people who have entered the space and formed some kind of connection that they got on to pursue outside of this space? I'm being very cryptic, so I want you to explain.
Absolutely. So it's been such a privilege to get to see people and invite them into the space. It was such an important factor for me to actually create a physical installation, especially in this time, to be able to invite people to take part in a physical experience. So far, through the first few weeks of the Biennale, we've had over 400 people join the experience. And we've really seen such an overwhelming response. People have had very deep, meaningful, powerful conversations. So as a part of the experience inside, the first few minutes we invite people to actually just sit in silence and just be still together, to look at each other, to just find this moment together in the space, which for most people is the first intimate encounter with a stranger that they've had in almost 18 months. And in the second part, they're given a series of questions to prompt discussion. So we've seen people have amazing, wild, intense conversations. We've seen people swap numbers. We've seen them go out for coffee or beer afterwards. We've had people who realised that they share various different experiences, but live all across the world. Just the other day, we had two people who came inside as strangers, realised they work in the same field, but just across the world from each other, and then ended up connecting through that. So it's really been such, I can't stress it enough, such a privilege to get to witness this moment between people, because that's really the foundation for this piece. But I would say for a lot of my work is trying to create these spaces, or these moments, these opportunities for different kinds of perspectives and experiences to come to the foreground, and for us to, through that, hopefully plant a seed to understand each other, ourselves, and the world around us from a new light.
I mean, this work, knowing your work, this particular installation feels like a kind of the culmination of years of research and testing and experimentation, building on, as we mentioned, your extensive research around interpersonal empathy. But of course, let's talk a little bit about the Design Museum project, which, as we mentioned, is a new body of work that you've been working on for about a year, which was an opportunity to really kind of push your thinking and your research into a slightly different direction, and in order to explore empathy, interpersonal empathy, but empathy as it relates to the natural world. And you've specifically been looking at trees and the local community in context of Holland Park in West London, where the Design Museum is based. So tell us a little bit about that work and that project, and what brought you there.
Yes, absolutely. As you said, it's been such a wonderful opportunity to really evolve and expand my practice in a very significant way. Coming into it from years of interpersonal empathy, and very deliberately, I started my whole practice in my studio from people in the physical world, from physical experiences and interactions. That was a deliberate choice that I made, because it was important for me to ground everything in this exchange. But now, reaching sort of a new stage and a new phase in my work, the opportunity to, together with you and the other designers and residents at the museum, to really take a couple of steps back, almost, to dive then back deeper into this new body of work. So one of the pieces that I've had the pleasure of creating is a new short film that really, both visually and physically, explores this idea of the perspectives of the trees. So it's quite an immersive piece that really takes you into the forest and explores the very different, this very different visual world that we're not so used to seeing. I think the imagery around trees is absolutely iconic. There are certain ways in which we're used to seeing the trees depicted and how we shoot and film trees. So this piece was really about pushing beyond that, exploring some new visual perspectives, and also creating almost a new visual language for the forest, but not from the human perspective, but from the trees' perspective. So I really invite everyone to go and experience it in our exhibition online. And then as a second part, one of the key outcomes has been this new design model and framework, the empathy ecosystem. And what the model really allows allows us to do is look at different perspectives within the model. So what I'm exhibiting at the moment are two different versions of it. So one is looking at the empathy ecosystem from the perspective of the human self. So looking at all these different relationships and interactions between us and ourselves, with other humans, other beings, objects, systems, and the natural world. And then we flip the perspective and actually we look at the model from a tree's perspective and look at how these relationships shift because of that. And then finally, one of the key parts, as you mentioned, I've really been so happy to get to explore the local area around the Design Museum, around Kensington and Chelsea, and really get to know the trees in that area, both in Holland Park, but also this amazing urban forest that is literally at our doorstep. I had the pleasure of working with some wonderful tree officers from Kensington and Chelsea. Firstly, to map some of the trees in the area, and not just the sort of so-called great trees, the really big historic trees that we may go and visit, but really looking at some of the everyday trees that grow on the streets or in small parks or squares, and through that really explore our everyday relationships with them, because I think when we often think of the forest, we only think of it as this faraway place that we have to intentionally travel to visit, when actually our daily relationship with trees are in the urban forest at our doorstep. So together with my collaborators, the amazing tree experts and guardians that I've had the joy of working with, I've introduced this tree tour of the area, celebrating different trees with different stories to tell all around Kensington and Chelsea. We've also given people a map to hopefully go and explore these trees themselves, and really it's an invitation for anyone to explore the trees in their areas, to really open their eyes and their minds and their hearts to those trees that I think we pass on a daily basis but don't often take notice of. What would it be like to actually put your hands on the bark, to try and get to know the tree, to even befriend the tree, feel the energy that runs through it? Most likely that tree has been there long before us, and it should be there long after us as well.
Yeah. And you actually have a tree tour coming up, don't you?
I do.
Next week, next Saturday, I think, where Enni and some of her collaborators will be doing a tour within Holland Park, and you will be kind of discussing the significance and the history around some of the subjects being the trees that you have been researching as part of your project. I mean, Enni, I think for that particular project, you've certainly kind of opened up my eyes to thinking about my relationship with the built environment in a very different way, but also with the natural world. And I think you should be very pleased it's a really successful provocation and exercise into taking on board non-dominant perspectives that surround us but that we often kind of ignore. Or maybe to kind of close, I just wanted to share a little bit about going back to the Istanbul Design Biennial and the kind of second part of the title of the biennial. If empathy is our lens or our theme, then Designs for More Than One was really our kind of provocation. And by that we meant, what are the designs that take into account the perspectives of other beings and other bodies, which I know is something that you're kind of concerned with in your work. And really we were using the biennial as a kind of vehicle towards more than human politics and concerns. I think, Designs for More Than One is as much a question as it is a statement. And we were interested in exploring, what are the designs that take in and that consider the multiple perspectives of cohabitants on this planet, as your work tackles. What are the designs that kind of reveal the complex entanglements that exist within any design process? And I think your work is, this is what interests me, and your work is no exception, to this. You exist within this very kind of progressive new thinking that I think is happening right now in design that is super exciting.
I love what you said there, because I think that's the most powerful challenge to all of us as designers and artists, to really consider our responsibility in designing for more than one. So as you beautifully said, for so long we've seeing the world, our environment and everything in it from a solely human perspective. We've really looked at whether it's trees or other beings or other natural entities as if they existed there only for our own purpose or our own amusement or use.
Right.
But now we have this amazing opportunity, and many people are doing this work already, but we really need to think about, yes, the environmental impact of our designs and the design processes, manufacturing processes, but beyond that, also the socio-cultural impact of what we do. And this is, I feel like, such a big moment and an opportunity for us as designers to really embrace this responsibility, but this opportunity to design in a way that is more empathic for ourselves, for each other, but also for our natural environment, all the other species that we share the planet with. So it feels like such an exciting time to be having this conversation with you, to think about the amazing work that you've done at the Istanbul Biennial, but also the work here at the London Design Biennale. It's wonderful to get to exhibit alongside all these pavilions that really explore this year's theme of resonance. What is the role of design and designers in designing a better world, a world that is more connected, more emotionally connected, that is more sustainable, that is more equitable. And that's why today we're here inside the Empathy Echo Chamber. And I would love to invite everybody to come and step inside and to visit, because it is a really powerful moment to get to witness this surprising encounter with a stranger. And I would dare to say most people, even the ones who've hesitated, because it can be a strange or scary premise to be so intimate and so vulnerable with someone you don't know. It's been wonderful to see people who then pushed through that initial fear and then embraced it and been open to give it a go, because I guarantee you'll learn something about the other person, but you'll certainly learn something about yourself as well.
Well, I think, in this moment where the world feels very hostile and disconnected, this piece that we're sitting in now feels like a very welcoming refuge and one that allows us to connect and to restore and to see the world through a different lens. And I really recommend that everybody comes down and sees it and has a chance to see it. And Enni, thank you so much for talking with me, and best of luck throughout the duration of the show.
Thank you so much to you, and I can't wait to see what comes next.
Thank you.
Oh, amazing. Okay.